My name is Sarah, and I'm about to share a secret I've kept hidden for years. It happened during what should have been a routine surgery. One moment, I was counting backward from 10. The next, well, let's just say I experienced something that defies medical explanation. What I encountered in those moments between life and death shook me to my core. It wasn't just a dream or a hallucination, it was real, visceral, and it changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. Are you ready to question everything you believe? My alarm pierced the quiet darkness at 5 a.m., jolting me from a restless sleep. I silenced the buzzing before it could wake my roommate. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. Another day, another mountain to climb at the tech startup where I had been burning the candle at both ends for the past 3 years. I dragged myself out of bed, my body protesting every movement. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized anymore. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale from too many hours under fluorescent lights. As I went through the motions of my morning routine, my mind was already racing ahead to the day's challenges. The stark contrast between my current life and my religious upbringing hit me as I passed the small cross hanging on my bedroom wall. A gift from my abuela, it now felt like a relic from another time. Another Sarah. The girl who spent Sundays in church, who found comfort in prayer, seemed like a stranger to me now. I rushed out the door, my mind already in overdrive, running through the day's to-do list. As I waited for the L train, I found myself envying the calm demeanor of an elderly woman nearby, wondering when I'd last felt that kind of peace. The train ride was a blur of emails and Slack messages, my fingers flying over my phone's keyboard as I tried to get ahead of the day. By the time I arrived at the office, my shoulders were already tense, a knot forming at the base of my neck. I pushed through the glass doors, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. The constant pressure was relentless. Meetings blended into conference calls, punctuated by frantic coding sessions and debates over user interface designs. Lunch was a hastily eaten salad at my desk, if I remembered to eat at all. As the day wore on, I could feel my energy flagging, my concentration slipping. But there was always one more task, one more problem to solve, one more milestone to hit. I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this pace wasn't sustainable. The headaches were becoming more frequent, my sleep more disturbed. My body was sending out warning signals, but I'd gotten so used to ignoring them, pushing through the exhaustion and stress. It was just the price of success, I told myself, the cost of making it in a cutthroat industry. As I finally packed up to leave the office, long after most of my colleagues had gone home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the darkened window. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. When had I become this person, so driven yet so disconnected from herself? It was during my nightly shower, my one moment of relative calm in the day, that I noticed it. A small lump, barely perceptible, just below my collarbone. In that moment, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the water temperature. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something that cut through the haze of ambition and stress, genuine fear. The next morning, instead of heading to the office, I found myself sitting in a sterile waiting room, filling out forms and trying not to let my mind race to worst-case scenarios. As the nurse called my name, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. But what happens when you're not supposed to die at all? As I lay on the operating table, I had no idea I was about to experience something beyond the realm of medical science. The hospital bustled around me, a whirlwind of activity that seemed distant and muffled. My mind, however, was racing with thoughts of deadlines and project milestones. As a nurse fastened the identification bracelet around my wrist, I found myself mentally drafting emails and rescheduling meetings. The gravity of the situation hadn't quite sunk in yet. Dr. Patel's reassuring smile did little to quell the faint unease growing in the pit of my stomach. He explained the procedure once more, his words washing over me as I nodded mechanically. It was just a routine surgery, I reminded myself, nothing to worry about. Yet, as I was wheeled into the pre op area, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The anesthesiologist approached, clipboard in hand. As he rattled off a series of questions, I noticed a slight tremor in his fingers. It was barely perceptible, but in that moment, it seemed to amplify my growing anxiety. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered almost imperceptibly, casting strange shadows across the room. I blinked, trying to focus on the doctor's words. As the gurney rolled into the operating room, the chill of the air raised goosebumps on my skin. The room was a cacophony of beeps and hums, machines standing sentinel around the table. I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a nearby tray. Pale, wide-eyed, vulnerable. For a brief moment, I longed for the comfort of my grandmother's prayers. The anesthesiologist placed the mask over my face, instructing me to count backward from 10. As the cool gas filled my lungs, my thoughts began to drift. I thought of the presentation I was missing, of the emails piling up in my inbox. I thought of my mother's voice, telling me to slow down, to take care of myself. I thought of the small cross hanging in my bedroom, gathering dust. The world began to blur at the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. My last conscious thought was a fleeting worry about whether I'd remembered to water my office plant. Then darkness enveloped me, and I slipped into the void. I don't know how long I floated in that nothingness. Time seemed to lose all meaning, but slowly, gradually, I became aware of something, a gentle warmth, a soft light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt weightless, free from the constant pressure and stress that had become my constant companions. As my heart rate plummeted and the steady rhythm of the EKG gave way to erratic spikes, I drifted deeper into that warm, welcoming light. Unaware that my life was hanging by a thread, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was as if all the worries and pressures of my hectic life had melted away, leaving only a profound sense of calm. The steady beep of the heart monitor suddenly gave way to an ominous, continuous tone. In an instant, the operating room erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Patel's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a laser-focused intensity, as he barked orders to his team. Nurses rushed to retrieve the crash cart, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The anesthesiologist quickly adjusted my medication, his hands moving with practiced precision. As paddles were charged and pressed against my chest, sending jolts of electricity through my body, I remained blissfully unaware of the frantic efforts to save my life. Instead, I found myself drifting in a sea of tranquility, far removed from the urgency and fear that gripped the operating room. My first awareness of this new state came gradually, like the slow lifting of a heavy fog. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital faded away, replaced by a gentle, radiant glow that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, warm, inviting, and inexplicably familiar. As my consciousness expanded, I became acutely aware that I was no longer tethered to my physical form. The constant aches and tensions that had become an ever-present part of my existence simply melted away. In their place, I felt a profound lightness, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. Gradually, I became aware that I was no longer alone in this luminous realm. A presence surrounded me, vast and encompassing, yet as intimate as a whisper. It conveyed a sense of unconditional love, so pure and powerful that it brought tears to my non-physical eyes. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that I was in the presence of something far greater than myself. Time seemed to lose all meaning in this space between worlds. I could have been there for mere seconds or for an eternity. It was impossible to tell. The peace and clarity I experienced were more real and vital than anything I had known in my physical existence. As I basked in this divine presence, I sensed that there was more to come. The light around me seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if preparing to reveal even greater truths. I felt myself opening up, ready to receive whatever wisdom this transcendent experience had to offer. As I floated in this sea of radiant light, a new awareness dawned within me. The presence I sensed was deeply personal, knowing me in ways I barely knew myself. My logical mind grappled with the impossibility of it all, while something deeper within me resonated with a profound truth. In this world, in this presence, there were no words, no sounds, yet meaning flowed between us with perfect clarity. Emotions, memories, and understanding passed back and forth in an intricate dance of communion. It was as if the very essence of my being was engaged in conversation with the universe itself. I felt layers of my identity peeling away. The driven tech employee, the lapsed Catholic, the ambitious dreamer. All these facets of myself were laid bare before this loving presence. Yet instead of judgment, I felt only acceptance, and a love so pure it brought tears to my non physical eyes. As our wordless dialogue deepened, a startling realization began to take shape. The qualities of this presence, the unconditional love, the perfect understanding, the sense of timelessness, they all pointed to something or someone I thought I'd left behind in my childhood. Could this be Jesus? The moment this thought formed, I felt a surge of recognition so powerful it took my breath away. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth that had always been there, waiting for me to see it. In that instant, I felt known, truly, deeply known, in a way I had never experienced before. Every fear, every doubt, every secret hope I'd ever harbored was laid bare, and met with a love so vast it defied imagination. I saw myself through the eyes of this presence, and for the first time I understood my own worth beyond any worldly measure of success. The weight of this realization was almost too much to bear. How could I, Sarah, the workaholic who had all but abandoned her faith, be worthy of such divine attention? Yet, as quickly as this doubt arose, it was washed away by another wave of that all encompassing love. I understood then that this love wasn't earned or deserved. It simply was, as constant and essential as the air I breathe in my physical life. The presence I now recognized as Jesus began to convey something to me, not in words, but in a language of pure understanding. At first, the message seemed elusive, slipping through my consciousness like water through cupped hands. My mind, accustomed to spreadsheets and algorithms, grappled with concepts that transcended human language. As I strained to comprehend, the core of the message began to take shape in my mind. It spoke of a purpose far beyond the narrow confines of career success and material wealth. The divine presence conveyed a truth both simple and profound, that the meaning of life lay in the connections we forge and the love we share. I saw my life spread out before me like a tapestry, each thread representing a moment, a decision, a relationship. The message showed me how every interaction, no matter how small, rippled outward, affecting the world in ways I could never have imagined. The long hours I'd spent climbing the corporate ladder seemed to fade in importance compared to the moments of kindness and compassion I'd overlooked. As the profound implications of this message sank in, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. It was as if I stood on the edge of a great precipice, about to take a leap into a new understanding of myself and my place in the universe. In that moment of clarity, a peace unlike anything I'd ever known washed over me. The constant chatter of my mind, the endless to-do lists, the nagging insecurities, all fell silent in the face of this cosmic truth. I felt a sense of purpose that resonated with the very core of my being. As this newfound peace settled over me, I realized that my life would never be the same. The path I had been so sure of suddenly seemed like a narrow trail compared to the vast landscape of possibilities now spread out before me. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that when I returned to my physical body, I would be embarking on a journey of transformation that would reshape every aspect of my existence. As consciousness flooded back, my body convulsed and my eyes flew open. I gasped desperately for air, my lungs burning as they expanded. The stark white ceiling of the operating room swam into focus, a jarring contrast to the warmth I had just left behind. The chaos around me was overwhelming. Doctors and nurses moved with frantic urgency, their voices a cacophony of medical jargon. The harsh fluorescent lights stabbed at my eyes, and the chill of the room raised goosebumps on my skin. My chest ached, likely from the defibrillator shocks that had restarted my heart. The taste of metal lingered in my mouth, and I could feel the pinch of IV needles in my arms. Every nerve ending seemed to be firing at once, sending conflicting signals of pain and relief. A flood of emotions washed over me as the reality of my situation sank in. I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had been pulled back from the brink of death. Relief mingled with an odd sense of loss. I had left behind a realm of indescribable peace and understanding. Fear crept in as I wondered what damage my body might have sustained during those critical moments. Dr. Patel's face appeared above me, his brow furrowed with concern.
Sarah, can you hear me?
I tried to respond, but my throat felt raw, and I could only manage a weak nod. The simple action sent a wave of dizziness through me. As the medical team continued to work around me, I felt an overwhelming urge to communicate what I had experienced. But how could I possibly put into words the vastness of what I had seen and felt? How could I describe the profound sense of connection and purpose that had been revealed to me? Tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over and running down my cheeks. They were tears of joy, of grief, of awe, and of profound gratitude. A nurse gently wiped them away, misinterpreting them as a sign of pain or fear. But these tears were my body's attempt to process an experience that defied rational explanation. As my condition stabilized and the frantic energy in the room began to subside, I found myself staring at my hands. They looked the same as always, and yet they felt different, as if they now held the potential for something greater than I had ever imagined. The enormity of what had transpired began to settle over me. I had died, technically, clinically died, and then returned. The boundary between life and death, which I had always assumed to be absolute, now seemed permeable, almost fluid. As they prepared to move me to the recovery room, I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to recapture a glimpse of the radiant peace I had experienced. Though it remained just out of reach, I could feel its echo resonating within me. Whatever challenges lay ahead in my recovery, I knew I would face them with a newfound strength and purpose. A nurse approached, her steps quiet on the linoleum floor.
How are you feeling, Sarah?
She asked, her voice gentle. I opened my mouth to respond, but words failed me. My mind raced with a million thoughts, yet I remained silent, unsure how to convey the profound experience I had undergone. The nurse patted my hand reassuringly.
It's normal to feel disoriented after surgery. Just take it easy.
As she checked my vitals, I grappled with the challenge of bridging the gap between my transcendent experience and the mundane reality of hospital procedures. The words felt inadequate, like trying to describe the vastness of the ocean to someone who had never seen water. My family arrived soon after, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father's usually stoic demeanor had softened. As they fussed over me, adjusting blankets and offering sips of water, I felt a surge of love that was both familiar and entirely new. I saw them not just as my parents, but as souls on their own journeys, connected to me in ways I was only beginning to understand.
We were so worried.
My mother said, her voice thick with emotion.
The doctor said your heart stopped for nearly 3 minutes.
I nodded, trying to find a way to reassure her without diminishing the profound nature of what had happened. I'm okay, Mom, I said softly. Better than okay, actually. She exchanged a puzzled glance with my father, clearly not understanding the peace that radiated from me. As the day wore on, a parade of doctors and specialists came to check on me. They spoke of medical miracles and the resilience of the human body, but their words felt hollow compared to the cosmic truths I had glimpsed. I answered their questions mechanically, feeling like a translator between two vastly different worlds. As night fell and the hospital settled into its muted nocturnal rhythm, I made a silent commitment to myself. I would honor this experience by living it. Whatever it took, I would find a way to bring the love and interconnectedness I had felt into every aspect of my life. It wouldn't be easy. I could already sense the skepticism I would face, the difficulty of expressing the ineffable. But I knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that this was my path forward. As I stepped across the threshold of my apartment, the familiar space felt oddly foreign. The carefully curated decor and sleek gadgets that once defined my success now seemed like relics from a past life. I moved through the rooms, my fingers trailing over surfaces I had barely noticed before. The silence, once a rare commodity in my hectic life, now felt like a constant companion. I paused before the large window overlooking the city, watching the bustling streets below. The scene that had once filled me with a sense of urgency and ambition now evoked a strange mix of detachment and compassion. My first attempt to return to my normal routine felt like trying to fit into clothes I had long outgrown. I sat at my desk, opening my laptop to tackle the mountain of emails that had accumulated during my absence. As I scrolled through message after message, each marked urgent or high priority, I couldn't help but see them in a new light. The projects and deadlines that had once consumed my every waking moment now seemed trivial in comparison to the profound truths I had glimpsed. I found myself struggling to summon the drive that had once propelled me through 14-hour workdays. The constant need for achievement, the relentless pursuit of the next big project, it all felt hollow now. I closed my laptop, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. As the days passed, I began to implement small changes in my daily life. I started each morning with a few moments of quiet reflection, allowing myself to reconnect with the sense of peace I had experienced. My usual rushed breakfast of coffee and a protein bar gave way to mindful meals, savoring each bite as if it were a gift. I found myself pausing throughout the day, taking deep breaths and grounding myself in the present moment. My interactions with others took on a new dimension. I listened more intently, noticing the subtle nuances in people's expressions and tone. The cashier at my local coffee shop, whose name I had never bothered to learn, became Maria, a nursing student working to support her family. I found myself engaging in conversations that went beyond surface level pleasantries, genuinely interested in the lives and experiences of those around me. At work, my colleagues began to notice subtle differences.
You seem different.
My assistant remarked one day, a puzzled expression on her face.
More relaxed, somehow.
I smiled, unsure how to explain the profound shift I had undergone. Instead, I asked about her weekend, listening with genuine interest as she shared stories of her son's little league game. As the weeks went by, I found myself craving more than just these small changes. The materialistic trappings of my former life began to feel suffocating. I donated clothes I had barely worn, simplified my living space, and canceled subscriptions to services I no longer needed. Each item I let go of felt like shedding a layer of my old self, making room for something new to emerge. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, I made a decision. I would carve out dedicated time each day for reflection and prayer. Not the rote prayers of my childhood, but a genuine attempt to reconnect with the divine presence I had encountered. It felt like taking the first step on a new journey, one that both excited and terrified me. As I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. This was more than just a lifestyle change. It was the beginning of a spiritual rediscovery. As my fingers traced the worn cover of my childhood Bible, I realized I was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith and the nature of reality itself. The leather was cool against my skin, its familiar texture awakening memories of Sunday school lessons and family prayers. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, a mix of anticipation and trepidation coursing through me. The gilt edged pages whispered as I turned them, the scent of old paper filling my nostrils. As I began to read, the verses took on new layers of meaning in light of my near death experience. The God I had encountered in that radiant space was both familiar and utterly beyond my comprehension. I closed my eyes, attempting to pray for the first time in years. The words felt clumsy on my tongue, a stark contrast to the wordless communion I had experienced beyond the veil. I persevered, pushing past the awkwardness, searching for that connection I had felt so strongly. Slowly, a sense of calm began to wash over me. It wasn't the overwhelming rush of divine presence I had hoped for, but a quiet, steady warmth that settled in my chest. My racing thoughts began to still, my focus sharpening on the present moment. As the days passed, I established a routine of prayer and meditation. The practice wasn't always easy. There were mornings when doubts and questions crowded out any sense of peace. But I persevered, driven by the memory of what I had experienced and the conviction that there was more to discover. One evening, as I sat in my usual spot by the window, a thought occurred to me. The church I had attended as a child was just a few blocks away. I hadn't set foot inside in over a decade, but now I found myself wondering what it would be like to return. As I wrestled with this decision, I turned once more to prayer. This time, something was different. As I closed my eyes and focused on my breath, I felt a sudden shift in my awareness. The boundaries of my consciousness seemed to expand, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, I felt that same sense of connection and unity I had experienced during my near-death encounter. Tears streamed down my face as wave after wave of love and understanding washed over me. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was on the right path. As the intensity of the experience faded, leaving me feeling both drained and exhilarated, a new thought began to take shape. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The time had come to share my story, to open up about the journey I had been on since that fateful day in the operating room. But where to begin? And who would believe me? The weight of my secret pressed down on me like a physical force. I knew I had to tell someone, but how do you even begin to explain that you've touched the divine? As I reached for my phone, I wondered, would sharing my experience bring me closer to my loved ones or push them away? My fingers trembled as I dialed my mother's number. Each ring seemed to stretch on for eternity, my heart racing in anticipation. When her familiar voice finally answered, a lump formed in my throat. "Mom," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something important." I could sense her concern through the phone, her maternal instincts picking up on the tremor in my voice. As I struggled to find the right words, memories of my near-death experience flooded back. "Remember when I was in the hospital?" I started, my voice growing steadier as I spoke. "Something happened during the surgery. Something I can't explain." I paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Mom, I think I died for a few minutes." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost see my mother's face, a mix of confusion and worry etched across her features. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion.
Oh, Sarah,
She breathed.
what do you mean?
As I recounted my experience, the light, the presence I had felt, the profound sense of peace and understanding, I could hear my mother's quiet sobs. Her reaction was a mix of awe, fear, and relief.
I always knew you were special.
She said, her voice filled with a newfound reverence. Our conversation lasted for hours, delving into questions of faith, life, and the nature of existence itself. As we talked, I felt a shift in our relationship. The spiritual divide that had grown between us over the years began to close, replaced by a shared sense of wonder and curiosity. As our call drew to a close, my mother asked a question that caught me off guard.
Have you told anyone else about this?
The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I realized that sharing my experience wasn't just about unburdening myself, It was about choosing who to trust with something so profound and personal. In the days that followed, I grappled with the decision of who else to tell. Each potential conversation felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if I would find solid ground or plummet into an abyss of disbelief and judgment. With this new sense of purpose, I felt truly aligned with the greater purpose I had glimpsed in that moment between worlds. As I drifted off to sleep, my mind was already turning towards the future, wondering how I could use my story to make a difference in the lives of others. As I shared my story, I noticed a profound effect on those who listened. In their eyes, I saw recognition, hope, and sometimes tears of relief. These reactions hinted at a deeper resonance within each person. One afternoon, I met with Lisa, a colleague from work, in a quiet corner of a local cafe. As I recounted my near death experience, she listened intently, her coffee growing cold and forgotten. When I finished, Lisa leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper.
Sarah, I've never told anyone this, but
She proceeded to share her own brush with the unexplainable, a moment of profound connection during a difficult time in her life. These encounters left me both exhilarated and overwhelmed. People were opening up to me, sharing their deepest fears and most cherished hopes. Their stories weighed on me, a mix of honor and burden that I struggled to process. Lying awake at night, I mulled over the conversations I'd had. A common thread emerged: a hunger for meaning, a desire to connect with something greater. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do more with my experience. Cautiously, I began offering a listening ear to those who sought me out. I created an anonymous blog, sharing my thoughts and experiences. The response was immediate and powerful. Comments poured in, each one affirming the universal nature of our spiritual longings. As I embraced this new role, I experienced a profound sense of fulfillment and a newfound peace in my daily life. Yet doubts lingered. Who was I to guide others on their spiritual journeys? I was still grappling with my own questions, still trying to make sense of what had happened to me. One evening, surrounded by journals filled with stories people had shared, an idea took shape. What if I could create a space for people to come together to share their experiences and support each other in their search for meaning? After careful consideration, I decided to start a support group for others seeking meaning in their lives. It would be a place of openness and acceptance where people could explore their spiritual experiences without judgment. As I sent out the first invitations, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was more than just sharing my story, it was actively stepping into a role of spiritual guidance. In that moment, I felt a sense of rightness about this decision. It was as if all the threads of my experience, my near death encounter, the connections I'd made, the stories I'd heard, were weaving together into a tapestry of purpose. As I stood before the weathered brick facade of St. Michael's Church, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within me. The familiar spire reached towards the heavens, just as it had throughout my childhood, but now it seemed to hold a different significance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, I was enveloped by the scent of incense and polished wood. The interior was exactly as I remembered: the rows of well-worn pews, the stained glass windows casting colorful patterns on the floor, the altar standing resolute at the far end. Yet, as I made my way down the aisle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing it all through new eyes. Father James emerged from the sacristy, his face lighting up with recognition.
Sarah, it's been far too long.
He said, pulling me into a warm embrace. As we spoke, I could sense his curiosity about my long absence and sudden return. I found myself choosing my words carefully, trying to convey the profound changes I'd undergone without alienating him. "I've been on a journey, Father," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not just a physical one, but a spiritual one. I've experienced things that have shifted my perspective." I watched his expression closely, searching for signs of judgment or dismissal. To my relief, I saw only patient understanding in his eyes. Over the next hour, Father James and I engaged in a deep conversation about faith, doubt, and the nature of spiritual experiences. He listened intently as I shared glimpses of my near death experience, nodding thoughtfully.
The mystery of faith is vast, Sarah.
He said, his voice gentle.
There's room for many paths within it.
As we talked, I found myself grappling with the complexities of honoring the tradition that had shaped me while embracing the growth I'd experienced. It was a delicate balance, one that required careful navigation. I realized that I didn't have to choose between my past and my present. Instead, I could find a way to integrate them both into a richer, more nuanced spirituality. Throughout the day, I reconnected with old friends and mentors from the church community. Each conversation brought its own challenges and revelations. Mrs. Peterson, my former Sunday school teacher, listened with rapt attention as I shared my story.
You always were a special one.
She said, her eyes misty.
I'm not surprised God chose to reveal himself to you in such a powerful way.
As word spread of my return and the reason behind it, I could sense a shift in the atmosphere. Some embraced me with open arms, eager to hear more about my experiences. Others regarded me with skepticism, their brows furrowed in confusion or concern. I realized that my journey had not only transformed me, but was now challenging those around me to examine their own beliefs. As the day wore on, anticipation built within me. Father James had asked if I would be willing to address the congregation during the evening service. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. How could I convey the depth of my experience in a way that would resonate with those who hadn't shared it? Standing before the gathered congregation that evening, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I looked out at the sea of familiar faces, some eager, some wary, all attentive. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak, not just from my mind, but from the very depths of my transformed soul. Faith, I said, my voice strong and clear, is not a static thing. It's a living, breathing entity that grows and changes with us. My journey has taught me that God is bigger than any one tradition or experience. He meets us where we are, whether that's in a church pew or on an operating table. As I spoke, I could see understanding dawning in the eyes of many. I shared how my near-death experience had not negated my childhood faith, but rather expanded it, allowing me to see the divine in new and profound ways. I emphasized the importance of remaining open to God's presence in all aspects of life, not just within the walls of a church. By the time I finished speaking, there was a palpable energy in the room. I had found a way to bridge my past and present, to honor the roots of my faith, while embracing the new growth that had sprouted from it. As I stepped down from the pulpit, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't an ending, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in my ongoing spiritual journey. As I reflect on my journey from career-driven skeptic to spiritual seeker, I'm struck by the profound power of unexpected grace. That moment on the operating table, when I touched the divine, became a catalyst for transformation that rippled through every aspect of my life. My story serves as a reminder that our darkest moments can open doorways to deeper connection and understanding. The near-death experience that could have ended my life instead breathed new purpose into it, allowing me to see the world and those around me through a lens of compassion and interconnectedness. As I share my experiences with others, I'm continually amazed by the resonance I encounter. It's as if my story gives people permission to explore their own brushes with the unexplainable, to voice the questions that linger in the quiet corners of their hearts. I can't help but wonder about the unseen realities waiting to break through in all our lives. What whispers of the divine might we hear if we quiet the noise of our daily routines? What profound truths might be revealed if we open ourselves to the possibility of grace? My journey continues, each day bringing new insights and challenges, But now, instead of racing towards some distant goal, I find myself fully present in each moment, attuned to the sacred that infuses even the most ordinary of days.